but beneath it ran a current of steel. They spoke not like someone begging for compromise, but like someone who had already decided what they would and would not accept. That was the first sign, and it unsettled the chamber more than any raised weapon could have. For in a place where most races believed power meant fleets and armies, the humans wielded something different: conviction. Whispers broke out among the gathered envoys. A few leaned close to each other, muttering in languages not meant to be understood by human ears. But the humans sat quietly, watching, letting that silence grow heavier with each passing moment. Patience, after all, was another weapon, and humanity had learned long ago how to use it. The aliens had expected history lessons, long explanations, perhaps even concessions to ease tensions. Instead, they were met with a story, not about star systems, not about empires, but about endurance. The humans spoke of wars fought on a fragile world that had once been only theirs. They spoke of loss, of mistakes, of survival pulled from the edge of despair. And as their words filled the room, the other delegates shifted uncomfortably. Because what the humans were truly saying was this: we have endured everything, and so we will endure you too. One delegate, scales glinting in the soft light, slammed a claw against the table. You speak as though you have the strength of an empire behind you, they hissed. Yet your fleets are small, your holdings scattered. What makes you believe you can dictate terms here? The human did not flinch. Their gaze met the aliens with a steady calm, as if weighing not just the words, but the intent behind them. And then with no hesitation came the reply: because we are human. And that means something more than you think. The chamber fell quiet again, and in that silence, old stories stirred in the minds of those present. Some had heard whispers of the human stubbornness, their refusal to surrender even when outnumbered. Others had dismissed them as rumors, tales exaggerated for effect. But here in this chamber it felt different. Real. To understand why the humans spoke this way, one had to look beyond this moment. Their history was not one of easy victories. It was written in scars. Every expansion into the void had come at a cost. Every treaty had been forged not from weakness, but from necessity. And every time someone thought humanity had reached its limit, they had found some hidden reserve, some stubborn spark that carried them further. Even now they did not boast of fleets or weapons. Instead, they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of a people who had already been through hell. It was not strength in numbers, but strength in will. That was the foundation of their diplomacy, the human way. The other delegates tried to press. They demanded explanations, asked for concessions, even threatened consequences if the humans would not bend. But the replies came the same: patient, calm, firm. Never once did they lash out, never once did they raise their voices. And yet, with each answer, the tension in the chamber deepened. Because it became clear that these negotiations would not end the way the others expected. There was unease too, even among the humans. One of them shifted slightly, fingers brushing over a worn object hidden in their pocket. A keepsake from Earth, a reminder of home. Their heart was steady but heavy. For beneath the calm words lay a truth they all carried. This meeting was not just about agreements. It was about proving to the galaxy what humanity truly was. And the outcome would decide whether their people stood free or were bound by chains of compromise. The alien voices grew louder, harsher. They spoke of numbers, of calculations, of probabilities. They tried to reduce everything to logic, to equations of power and advantage. But the humans had learned that life was not an equation. It was something messier, harder, and far more unpredictable. And that unpredictability, that refusal to fit into neat boxes, was their greatest strength. When one delegate sneered and asked, "Do you threaten us with war?" the human response was simple, almost too simple. "No. We offer peace. But only the kind of peace we can live with." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through every corner of the chamber. The difference was clear. This was not submission. This was not compromise for the sake of comfort. This was humanity setting its terms, unshakable. And yet, even as the chamber fell into uneasy quiet, something else stirred beneath the surface. Because for all their calm words, the humans knew that not everyone in that room would accept what had been said. Some powers thrived on control. Some feared anything they could not understand. And humanity, standing firm in its own way, was something they could neither control nor fully predict. The lead human glanced around the room, reading faces, feeling the weight of the moment. Behind the calm exterior, their thoughts raced. They knew danger was close, not from the words themselves but from what might come after. If the galaxy decided to test their resolve, if the threats turned into action, humanity would have to prove with more than words what negotiation meant in their hands. And so the chamber held its breath, caught between silence and eruption. Every word spoken before now felt like a spark waiting to ignite something greater. The humans sat ready, knowing that whatever came next would decide more than just a treaty. It would decide whether their people's voice carried in this galaxy, or whether it was silenced before it could grow louder. The alien delegates whispered again, voices sharp and urgent, plotting their next move. And as their words echoed in the shadows of the chamber, the humans exchanged a glance, silent but certain. They had prepared for this moment. They had expected resistance. And deep within they carried a truth the others could not yet see. The negotiations were not just words. They were a test of will. A test of what it truly meant to be human. And as the chamber doors sealed shut, locking them all within for what came next, the air grew heavier, the tension sharper. No one knew who would bend first or what would be lost before this was done. But one thing was certain. Humanity would not bow. The chamber grew colder, though no one touched the controls. It wasn't the air that shifted, it was the silence. Across the long, curved table, alien faces flickered with unease. The Eternal Accord delegation, beings who had ruled trade routes and bent entire systems to their authority, leaned forward in agitation. They weren't used to waiting for answers. And yet every human in the room sat in stillness, letting that silence do the talking. The lead negotiator, a tall figure in a plain suit with nothing ornate or intimidating about him, folded his hands and simply watched. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink at the veiled threats that had filled the last hour. The aliens couldn't understand it. To them, silence was weakness, a lack of ground to stand on. But the humans held it like a weapon, and the longer it stretched, the sharper it became. The Accord's voice finally broke through. You cannot hope to stall forever. The terms are clear. Submit, and humanity will be allowed access to the outer colonies. Refuse, and the delegate's throat pulsed as he cut the sentence short. He didn't need to finish it. Everyone at the table knew what would follow: refusal, blockades, sanctions, and maybe worse. The chamber was vast and silent, carved from stone that had never seen the light of any sun. 1,000 alien voices had been silenced here, their words echoing off the high ceiling before vanishing into the air like smoke. At the center of the room sat a table that seemed older than the stars themselves, polished smooth from countless negotiations that had taken place across centuries. Around it now sat the rulers of the Eternal Concord, a coalition of species so ancient they believed themselves unshakable. They had come to discuss what they called a minor human incident. But there was nothing minor about it. The humans had done what no other species had dared. They had refused to bow, refused to bend, and in their refusal they had shaken the balance of power in the galaxy. The Concord had summoned them here, expecting compliance, expecting apologies. They had summoned them the way a teacher calls in a reckless student, certain of control. When the human envoy walked into the chamber, the air shifted. He carried no weapon, no shield, only a simple expression that revealed nothing. The aliens studied him with countless eyes, wings twitching, mandibles clicking, scales rippling, each species waiting to see what kind of creature dared to walk unarmed into a den of power. The human met every stare, not with arrogance but with something worse, calm. Silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, one of the Concord's oldest members spoke, its voice layered with disdain. You humans were given a chance. A chance to submit, to live under the protection of our law. And yet you have resisted. The word dripped with disbelief, as if resistance were something unnatural, something only humans could think of. The envoy did not answer immediately. He let the weight of the accusation linger, let the stillness grow sharp. Only when the tension reached breaking did he reply in a voice low but steady. We don't see submission as survival. We see it as surrender. And humanity does not surrender. Whispers spread across the chamber, nervous flickers of alien voices betraying unease. No species had ever spoken to the Concord this way. It was not defiance alone, it was conviction. What the aliens could not understand, what they had never faced before, was the human way of negotiation. For every other species, diplomacy was a calculation of survival, a dance of power where weakness meant death. But for humans, negotiation was not about survival at all. It was about dignity, about identity, about something invisible yet unbreakable. They carried it like fire in their blood, a quiet, stubborn flame that made them dangerous in ways no weapon ever could. The envoy leaned forward, his hands resting on the ancient table. His eyes scanned the room slowly, not as prey before predators, but as a teacher addressing restless children. You called us reckless. You think we should kneel. But you mistake our silence for fear. What you don't understand, his voice tightened, is that humans don't fear the same way others do. We have lived with wars that scarred our skies. We've buried our cities in the ashes of our own mistakes. And still we built again. If you threaten us with destruction, we will outlast it. If you threaten us with chains, we will break them. If you threaten us with extinction, he paused, and in that pause hung a weight greater than any shouted threat. Then you will discover what it means when humanity has nothing left to lose. The chamber went colder. Even the walls seemed to draw in the words, holding them like secrets too sharp to let go. One of the Concord leaders, a towering being with crystalline skin, shifted uneasily. Your people are fragile. You are few compared to us. If you reject our terms, if you force our hand, your species will vanish before a single Concord cycle has passed. The human envoy smiled faintly, not with arrogance, but with something the aliens did not know how to name. It was a smile born of memories, of graves and ruins, of survival carved from impossible odds. Fragile? He said softly. Yes, we are fragile. But so is glass. And sometimes when glass breaks, the shards cut deepest. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. The Concord members shifted, uncertain. For the first time in living memory, the unshakable coalition felt something they had forgotten long ago: doubt. Outside the chamber, warships floated in cold space. Alien fleets gleamed with technology so old it seemed like magic, each vessel a symbol of dominance. Against them, the human ships seemed small, crude, even fragile. But aboard those ships was a will the Concord had not accounted for, a resolve that had been forged in centuries of hardship. And in that negotiation hall, a battle as dangerous as any fought with weapons was unfolding. The aliens believed they were facing a diplomat. What they did not realize was that they were facing the essence of humanity itself, defiant, unyielding, unwilling to be reshaped. The envoy's voice lowered. You asked us here for diplomacy. So here it is, the human way. We will not be ruled, we will not be broken, and we will not trade our freedom for survival. If you want to negotiate, understand this: you are not speaking to the weak. You are speaking to a species that has already learned how to survive everything the universe could throw at it. If you think your threats will change us, then you have learned nothing of what humanity truly is. A ripple of unease swept across the alien council. For the first time in ages, they were not certain how the negotiation would end. Power had shifted subtly, invisibly, from those who believed they controlled the galaxy to the species that had nothing left to lose. The envoy leaned back, his eyes steady. So tell me, rulers of the Concord, do you still wish to continue this negotiation? The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing down like a storm before it breaks. The aliens looked at one another, each realizing they were standing at the edge of something dangerous, something they could not quite measure. And in that moment, for the first time, they began to fear that humanity was not just another species to be conquered. Humanity was something else entirely. The chamber lights flickered once, as if the very universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would speak next. And then, without warning, the envoy's words were cut short by a sudden sound, an alarm that was not part of the Concord's chamber. It came from the human ship orbiting above, sharp, urgent, alive with danger. The envoy's calm gaze did not break, but his silence spoke volumes. Something was happening, and whatever it was, it would change everything. The Concord had called humanity to the table for peace. But what they had summoned was something they had never prepared for. Negotiations were about to take a turn they had never imagined. The silence in the chamber stretched long after the humans spoke their opening words. The walls themselves seemed to absorb the tension, heavy with the weight of what was unspoken. The other delegates from distant stars exchanged uneasy glances, some subtle, others not even trying to hide their discomfort. They had expected something different, something familiar. To them, negotiations were predictable. Demands made, demands softened, treaties shaped through endless words. But already, the humans had made it clear this was not going to be one of those endless exchanges. The lead representative sat straight, shoulders tight with resolve. Their voice carried calmness. But the human's eyes lifted slowly, steady, calm. You've made your threat clear, he said at last, his voice soft yet carrying across the chamber. But I don't think you realize what you've already revealed. That puzzled the aliens. They whispered among themselves, their voices like buzzing metal. What could he mean? The human didn't clarify. He let the tension hang, building like a storm. His team behind him stayed utterly composed, their stillness unnerving to the delegates who were used to watching nervous fidgeting, quick whispers, or panicked concessions. But the humans gave none of that. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper, something the aliens could not name. It was confidence rooted in hardship. Humanity had lived through wars, famines, collapses, and endless rebuilding. For them, pressure wasn't new. It was the air they had always breathed. One of the younger Accord delegates slammed his hand on the table. You cannot sit there and smile while your species risks annihilation. We've ended civilization stronger than yours for less. The human leaned forward just slightly, his voice dropping, almost intimate. And yet you've never faced us. Not really. You've studied our ships. You've measured our weapons. But you've never understood who we are. The chamber lights flickered. The Accord's communication array was intercepting whispers from ships stationed outside, ships ready to enforce their threats. And yet not a single human in the chamber looked worried. Instead, their eyes were locked onto their leader, waiting as if they already knew the rhythm of what came next. He continued, "You speak of destruction as if it's something we fear. But destruction is where we've always begun again. We lose cities, we rebuild stronger ones. We lose worlds, we reclaim harsher ones. You cannot threaten us with loss because loss is part of us." The Accord's delegation faltered. Their kind believed in leverage, in pressing fear into submission. But what do you do when the other side doesn't flinch? When their history has already stripped them of illusions of safety and still they rise? The humans smiled faintly then, not with joy, but with the weariness of a people who had carried too much yet still stood tall. Negotiations aren't about what one side demands. They're about what each side is willing to endure. And you've already shown your fear in every word you've spoken. One of the aliens hissed, their scaled jaw tightening. Fear? You dare. But the words faltered when the human's gaze didn't break. Around the chamber, it felt like gravity itself had shifted, heavier, thicker. For the first time, the Accord wondered who was truly on trial here. Behind the main delegation, silent doors slid open, and a low hum filled the chamber. Reinforcements, security drones hovering, armed and gleaming. The Accord meant to remind humanity of where power really rested. But the humans didn't move. Not one. They didn't even turn their heads to acknowledge the threat. Their stillness was louder than any protest could have been. Then the lead negotiator spoke again, his voice steady, almost gentle. You think weapons will end this conversation. But you've already lost the moment you showed them. Because we humans don't negotiate with fear. We negotiate with truth. And the truth is simple, you need us more than we need you. That statement rippled through the chamber. The Accord's delegates stiffened, their confidence breaking for a heartbeat. Because buried inside the humans' words was a fact they had tried hard to bury. Humanity's reach into the fractured edges of the galaxy had already outpaced predictions. Colonies growing in places no other species had dared to settle. Outposts surviving where resources were thin, where storms ripped at ships, where even the Accord's most advanced fleets had failed to hold ground. The aliens had dismissed it as desperation. But what if it wasn't? What if it was resilience that couldn't be matched? The human leaned back then, his silence reclaiming the chamber. It wasn't over. It wasn't resolved. The Accord would respond with fury, with disbelief, maybe even with force. But something had shifted in the room. A seed of doubt had been planted in the hearts of rulers who had never before questioned their own superiority. The chamber doors sealed again with a hiss, and the hum of drones pressed closer. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to choke. Every eye was on the human delegation. Would they break? Would they fight? Would they reveal their hand too soon? But the humans only waited. And in that waiting, the real war had begun. The chamber fell into a silence that felt heavier than gravity itself. The alien delegates sat rigid, their luminous eyes narrowing, their scales or fur bristling with an unease they struggled to contain. The humans, by contrast, remained still, quiet, steady, unreadable. It was that quietness that unsettled the others the most. No outburst, no frantic display, no scrambling for control. Just patience. Just the strange human way of waiting, as if they already knew how this would unfold. One of the alien leaders finally broke the silence. His voice carried like a tremor through stone, heavy with the weight of power. You claim peace, yet you wield your strength as a weapon of silence. What is your true intent? The lead human delegate leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed, calm but unyielding. Our intent is survival. Our intent is respect. We did not come to beg for it, we came to earn it. And now that we've earned it, you must decide what to do with it. A ripple of unease passed through the eternal circle, their version of leadership. Survival. Respect. The words struck deep, cutting through centuries of order built on dominance and fear. The humans were not asking for recognition. They were demanding it without saying the word. Then came the twist none of them expected. A transmission flickered into the chamber, unbidden. Unauthorized. An urgent tone carried across the space, a voice, human, distressed. "This is Outpost Theta. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Not by pirates, not by raiders. Something else, something we don't understand." Every alien head turned sharply. The humans did not move. Their calmness remained, though beneath it was the spark of something rawer, anger. Not panic, but fury, controlled and sharpened like a blade. The delegates realized in that moment what it meant to awaken such a force. The lead human's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "You thought we came here only to talk. But you forget, when humanity talks, it's never our only move." The words fell like a stone into water, sending ripples through every mind present. The aliens had believed this gathering was the fulcrum of negotiation. But now it seemed they were not negotiating for the future. They were already living in its shadow. The transmission cut again, louder this time, broken with static. "Unknown vessels, tearing through defenses, not like anything we've seen, they're coming straight." The voice vanished, leaving only the hollow crackle of silence. The chamber shook, not from physical force but from the sudden realization that what hovered beyond the edges of this negotiation was larger than any treaty. Humanity was not here just to secure a place among the stars. They were here to prove they would endure, even against whatever nightmare had just awoken on the frontier. The alien leaders scrambled, their composure breaking in ways they had sworn never to reveal. Some whispered of an ancient enemy thought extinct. Others feared it was something humanity itself had created. None dared voice the suspicion that perhaps the humans already knew what this was, and had walked into this chamber with more cards in hand than they had ever admitted. One of them finally managed to speak, voice strained, words dragging like lead. "If what your outpost reports is true, then this is not only your problem. It is ours. But why keep this hidden? Why now?" The human looked across the chamber, meeting the eyes of species older and stronger by history's measure, and yet smaller now in the weight of this moment. "Because trust is earned. And until now you never trusted us. Perhaps this was the only way you would understand what humanity truly is." The silence deepened again, thick, heavy. Humanity was not bargaining anymore. They had escalated the conflict by doing nothing more than revealing the truth. And in that truth, the balance of the entire galaxy trembled. A second twist then began to coil its way into the room, unnoticed at first. On the alien delegates' consoles, encrypted transmissions lit up, faint, almost hidden as though someone tried to suppress them. Warnings, red flashes. Reports from other borders. Sightings of the same unknown vessels, not just near humanity's colonies, but across multiple frontiers far and wide. The aliens stiffened as the realization spread. This wasn't a human problem. It wasn't even a border problem. It was everywhere. One delegate turned sharply, whispering in a voice that shook. "It's not them they've brought here. It's us they've brought into it." For the first time, fear crossed the faces of the Eternal Circle. They had always seen themselves as rulers of order, guardians of a balance they defined. But in the space of minutes, humanity had dragged them into a storm they were not prepared to face. And the humans were still calm. Too calm. The chamber pulsed with unspoken questions, but one burned hotter than the rest. Did the humans know this was coming? Were they not negotiating peace but setting the stage for war? The lead human finally stood, the sound of the chair scraping against the polished floor loud in the silence. His words carried weight, deliberate and cold. "This is the moment you must decide. Will you face what comes with us, or will you stand alone and hope it passes you by? But remember, when humanity stands, we don't stand halfway. We stand to the end." It was not a threat, but it was sharper than any blade. The aliens felt it settle into their bones. Outside the chamber, unseen, fleets were already moving. Signals traveled faster than fear, carrying news of the unknown vessels tearing across stars. And everywhere those signals landed, one fact was repeated again and again: humans were already there. Holding the line. Bleeding for space, not only theirs but for the whole of the galaxy. The chamber trembled not with sound, but with decision unspoken. Some aliens leaned forward, already calculating alliances. Others recoiled, unwilling to admit what their pride resisted. But all of them knew the same truth. Whatever was coming, humanity had dragged them into it. And humanity would not let go. The silence stretched into something unbearable. Then, faint, almost like a whisper from the stars themselves, came another intercepted message, just a single fragment before it cut. "They're not here for us. They're here for the humans." And with that revelation, the chamber seemed to shrink, the air growing thin, every eye turning back toward the humans. those strange, relentless beings who had walked into this hall to negotiate, but had instead forced the galaxy to face something darker. It was no longer just a question of peace or war. It was survival. And survival, the aliens realized, was something humanity had been preparing for all along. The chamber was no longer quiet. The voices of two empires clashed in a way words could no longer hide. The alien leaders, tall and cold, had drawn the line clear, convinced that fear would force humans to kneel. But humans had never been the kind to bow, and now that truth blazed across the room like fire catching dry grass. The human envoy stood, their face calm but eyes burning. They had spent the long hours listening, weighing every threat, watching the way the aliens smirked when they thought they had the upper hand. Now, as the final demand was laid out, submission, a surrender of sovereignty, the envoy's silence was louder than any shout. The aliens expected fear. They expected trembling. Instead they saw something else entirely: resolve. The air seemed to thicken. Even those who could not understand human expressions felt the shift. The envoy's voice, when it finally came, was steady but heavy with a force that made the walls seem to lean closer. You misunderstand us. We do not measure strength by fleets or by titles carved into stone. You think us fragile because our skin tears, because our lives are shorter. But you forget the one thing that makes us dangerous: our refusal to give up. Push us to the wall and we will break through it. Threaten our children, and we will burn down the stars to keep them safe. The aliens recoiled slightly, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty in them. The envoy wasn't bluffing. Every heartbeat of silence afterward was filled with the weight of human history. Wars survived, worlds rebuilt, disasters endured. Humanity had walked through fire so many times, and here they stood, scarred but unbroken. One alien leader sneered. And you think this defiance saves you? You think passion outweighs power? We have crushed 100 species stronger than yours. You are one voice against an empire. But then came the second twist. The envoy leaned forward, placing a single small device on the table. It looked ordinary, unthreatening, but the change in posture made every alien present lean back, their instincts uneasy. The envoy pressed a key and a soft hum filled the air. A map unfolded in glowing light, spreading across the table, and with it, a revelation none of the Eternal Kingdom's leaders had expected. You thought you understood us, the envoy said. You've studied our weapons, counted our ships, measured our colonies. But you have not studied our alliances. The map shifted. Dozens of signals lit up, not human in origin. Species long thought too weak or too scattered to matter. Species the Eternal Kingdom had ignored or enslaved, their voices crushed. But now they were here, present, united, and standing with humans. The envoy's voice deepened. While you pressed your boots against our throats, we spoke with those you left behind. You taught them to hate tyrants. You gave them every reason to join us. And now they are no longer silent. The chamber erupted with alarm. The Eternal Kingdom had not expected this. For centuries they had ruled by fear, keeping the oppressed isolated, convinced they were alone. But humans had stitched the broken together, weaving trust where despair had been. That was their weapon. Not fleets, not firepower, connection. The lead alien slammed a clawed hand against the table. This is rebellion. This is treachery. No, the envoy said softly. This is negotiation. Human style. You tried to corner us with force. We answered with unity. You wanted us afraid. We gave hope instead. You thought we stood alone. We never do. Every human in the chamber felt their heart pounding, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was pride. For the first time in memory, the Eternal Kingdom looked uncertain. Their cold confidence cracked, and through it slipped the truth they had always denied: their empire was not eternal. But just as the silence stretched, the final twist came. A signal flashed across the envoy's display, urgent and unplanned. The humans hadn't called it, it was coming from one of the oppressed species themselves. A fleet was already moving. Not under human command, not as part of any plan, but as a spark lit too long ago finally bursting into flame. The envoy realized then that the humans had unleashed something even they could not control. The aliens saw it too. For the first time they weren't staring down only humanity. They were staring at the awakening of an entire galaxy, one that had been waiting for someone to remind them they could rise. And it had been humans, fragile, stubborn humans, who had given them the courage. The envoy's words cut through the chamber one final time. You wanted to teach us what power means. Instead you've been taught. This isn't the end of negotiations. This is the beginning of the end of your empire. The chamber trembled, not from weapons but from the sudden shift of history itself. Suspense hung heavy, every heartbeat caught between what was about to come and what had already been set in motion. The Eternal Kingdom had all the fleets, all the firepower, but for the first time in their reign, they saw the truth written in human eyes. Their time was over. And humanity, with all its flaws, had lit the match. The chamber felt heavier than before, yet something had shifted. For so long the Eternal Kingdom had filled every silence with their presence, their dominance, their arrogance. Now the silence was theirs to bear. The human envoy did not move at first, simply watching the weight of realization sink into alien faces. The message was clear enough. The galaxy no longer belonged to one empire. A murmur spread through the alien delegates, the kind of low sound that betrayed unease. For the first time they weren't united. Some whispered among themselves, eyes darting at the holographic map still glowing above the table, the web of alliances and signals too bright to ignore. Others glared at the human envoy with open fury, their claws digging into the polished surface of the chamber's floor. But behind their rage, fear was beginning to bleed through. The envoy finally spoke again, voice steady and human to the core. You still have a choice. You can cling to an empire built on fear, or you can step into a future built on something stronger. Unity, respect, cooperation. It is not too late, but the path forward will not be on your terms alone. The lead alien spat back, bitter and trembling with the kind of anger born from losing control. And if we refuse? The envoy didn't flinch. Then you'll learn what humanity has always known, that survival is never given, it's fought for. And you won't just be fighting us anymore. You'll be fighting everyone you've crushed under your rule. And that fight, you cannot win. The silence that followed wasn't filled with threats. No grand retort came from the Eternal Kingdom. They had built their power on the belief that no one would dare rise against them. But now, with the galaxy stirring, they were looking at the one truth they had denied for too long. Fear had its limits. Outside the chamber, the galaxy was already moving. Fleets once broken were finding new strength. Species long silenced were speaking, their voices carried now by humans who had refused to give in. The envoy knew this wasn't the end of struggle. Nothing about this path would be simple. But it was the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before. An age where power wasn't held by one empire, but by the many who dared to stand together. As the meeting broke, the human delegation walked out without another word. They didn't need to gloat. They didn't need to threaten. The truth had been planted, and it would grow on its own. The envoy felt the eyes of their team, the weight of what they had all endured to reach this point. Every small victory, every moment of doubt, every risk they had taken, now it all felt worth it. Humanity had not just survived. They had given others the courage to do the same. On the transport back to their vessel, the envoy leaned back against the seat, finally letting the tension drain from their shoulders. 4 hours, they had stood against an empire with nothing but words and conviction. And somehow that had been enough. One of their aides spoke softly, almost hesitant. Do you think they'll ever agree? That they'll change? The envoy looked out the viewport, watching the stars slide past as the ship carried them away from the heart of the Eternal Kingdom. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not right away. But they've seen the shift. They've seen the fire catch. And once people see a world beyond their chains, no empire can hold them forever. Another aide, younger, still shaken from the chamber, whispered, I was afraid. I thought they would crush us right there. The envoy turned to them, a faint smile on their face. So did they. That's the difference. They thought fear was the end of the story. But humans, we've always known fear is only the beginning. What matters is what comes after. The words lingered in the cabin, quiet but steady, a reflection of everything humanity had carried across centuries of struggle. Fear, loss, hope, resolve. Again and again they had been written off, underestimated, dismissed as fragile. And again they had endured, surprising even themselves at times. As their ship broke into the open void, the envoy closed their eyes for a moment. They thought of Earth, of the faces waiting back home, of the children who might grow up in a galaxy no longer ruled by a single hand of iron. The war wasn't over. The struggle wasn't finished. But humanity had proved something undeniable, that even in the face of overwhelming power, a small spark of defiance could change everything. Days later, across the galaxy, news spread like wildfire. Species once fractured by distrust began reaching out, finding strength in each other. Where once there had been silence, now there were whispers of unity. And behind it all, humanity's role was spoken of with both awe and disbelief. Not because they were the strongest, not because they held the largest fleets, but because they had reminded everyone what it meant to fight not just for themselves, but for something greater. The Eternal Kingdom tried to project strength, tried to claim control was unbroken. But the cracks were showing. Rebellions they thought impossible were igniting. Treaties once unthinkable were forming. And every move they made, they knew, would be watched by human eyes that would not waver. For humanity the lesson was clear. They had not won through dominance or fear. They had won by being who they had always been, resilient, stubborn, and unwilling to bow. Their greatest strength was not their weapons but their spirit. And in showing that spirit, they had done something no empire ever had. They had turned subjects into allies and allies into a movement. In the end, it wasn't just about diplomacy. It wasn't about politics. It was about survival, about dignity, about hope carried across the stars. Humanity had not just spoken for themselves. They had given voice to millions who had been silenced. And in doing so, they had changed the course of the galaxy. The envoy months later would sit quietly on Earth again, watching children laugh under a sky still blue, still theirs. The stars no longer felt distant. They no longer felt like something owned by tyrants. They were possibilities waiting to be shaped. And for the first time, the envoy allowed themselves to believe, not just in survival but in a future worth fighting for. The Eternal Kingdom would fight back, of course. They would not fall easily. But humanity had already shifted the story. The day of one empire's rule was fading, and the dawn of something new had begun. And it all started with one truth, carried in every heartbeat of the human race. When pushed, humanity never breaks. Humanity unites. Humanity endures. And humanity, against all odds, inspires others to rise. That was diplomacy. Human style.